Welcome back to Learning Matters. I'm Doug Woldridge, your host, and today we're joined by Dr. Alaina Szlachta, and she's here to discuss her new book, Measurement and Evaluation on a Shoestring, which comes out November 26th. There's going to be a link in the description for pre-order. So, let's get to the interview. Well, thank you so much for joining the podcast. I'd like to start with how you found yourself in a career in learning and development.
Well, Doug, thank you for having me in this conversation. I'm looking forward to getting to know you better and telling more about myself and this journey I've been on. So it starts with a love story. It's my favorite story, way of framing like how I got to where I am. So there's two pieces of this love story. One was, like many of us, I fell in love with teaching. So I got a bachelor's degree in communications, thought I was going to be a public relations professional, hated that. Went to Mexico and taught English as a foreign language. And it was in that 4 months that I really understood the connection, the practical connection of learning to the real world, because people were coming to our classes because they needed to understand a language that was going to help them get promoted, not get fired, and just overall connect better to whoever it was they were serving. So that was my love story with learning, and followed that through to get a doctorate degree in education and human behavior. And the second part of my love story is with data. So before I went and got my doctorate degree, I did a little bit of work in the communications and marketing sector. I worked for a small business owner who was so ahead of the game in terms of data fluency. Their entire business in like the early 2000s was built on Salesforce. They had these data integrity rules. The entire business was data-backed, evidence-based. Like we didn't make any decisions unless we had the evidence to move forward, because as a small business, like we really had to make smart choices and investments in time and people and systems. And so I spent 3 years at that company, and it really crafted my entire professional perspective. And then I went to grad school. That's where my data and education merged together, and worked in the public health and nonprofit world for quite a while, where we were grant funded, donor based, and everything we had to do we had to earn the right to do it via data. Well, then, Doug, I decided, I'm going to go into the corporate world, because if I stay too long in this nonprofit higher ed sector, like no one's going to take me seriously if I ever wanted one day to go to corporate. So I worked for a Brandon Hall award-winning learning team, and they didn't measure anything.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
Yeah. So it was kind of this and that's not true. They measured some things, but they didn't measure the things that I knew were going to be really useful in improving our programming and making it more practical. And so it led me to this consulting career. Now I've been on my own for 5 years, and a book deal, and continuing to research the world of L&D and education and how people are using data or not, and how we can ultimately help our industry become more impactful and more viable in the face of uncertainty with good data. And that's where I'm at today. Yeah. That's where I spend my time.
That's awesome. That is quite the journey. And what inspired you to write Measurement and Evaluation on a Shoestring?
So it is every aspiring author's dream to be invited to write a book. And that is exactly what happened to me. So during COVID, we all have our COVID story. So during COVID, I went to India and took a little bit of a break from working in my consulting practice, and decided to do an informal study that actually was quite a robust study. It was 40 learning and development professionals I interviewed from all over the world. It was one of those things where I just started talking to people, and then I was like, who else should I talk to? I'm trying to get more diverse perspectives. Well, that snowballed into 40 different people. And that study I presented at an ATD conference. In the ATD conference audience was an an editor for ATD publishing arm, and they approached me a bit later and said, hey, we're looking for an author for this book. Would you be interested in writing it? And I thought, wow, how perfect. I can use the data from my study as part of this book. And I had been doing this literature review. I'd gone back to like the 1940s of the different theories around learning and measurement and evaluation.
Ooh,
and
cool.
So all of that work was just ripe for it to be published in a book, and it just came together so beautifully.
That's awesome. Can you explain, one question I have is, can you explain the core concept behind the build, borrow, buy approach?
It's a very simple answer, Doug. I didn't come up with it. The publisher did. And the book is actually part of a series, a Shoestring series that focuses on essentially how to do more with less. It's not a series. I think contrary to popular belief, the idea of shoestring means people who are inexperienced and we want to help them cut corners. And that is not at all what I mean by shoestring. What I mean by shoestring is like anybody and everybody will be in a shoestring situation. Think like I might have a PhD, but I'm working with a nonprofit and I have limited resources. So it's really about how do we be very smart and strategic with the time, the money, and the resources that we do have. And it's a very different way of thinking than I think is common in the measurement sector, which is like, do the ROI approach, do the Kirkpatrick approach, and like that's all there is. And in truth, those aren't bad approaches, but they are time consuming and costly in some cases. So what can we do if not those models? And there's a lot more that can be done and a lot more efficiently and smartly, and then work your way up to an ROI study if and when that makes sense one day.
Right. And you mentioned that lack of time, stakeholder support, as well as budget are, the key barriers here to measurements. So how does your book help readers overcome these challenges?
Great question. The answer is, I think, twofold. One is what are we accountable for? And then the other one is how do we move toward more purposeful partnerships with business leaders, which is a joint effort. So first, what can we as individuals do? And that's build our data literacy muscle. So I think a lot of L&D professionals, they go get certification programs, or they're like really good in sales, or they're really good in customer experience, and they're asked to move into a leadership role in learning, and they don't necessarily have any kind of background in learning science or measurement, which I think are the two most important things. Like good learning science and good data and measurement practices like would make our programming like crazy powerful. But not everybody has those backgrounds, especially both of them, the learning science and the measurement and data side of things. So I think the learning science piece is more readily accessible. There's a lot of great content and conversations and books out there that will help us to improve our integration of learning science into our work. The data side of things is a little more complex. I left academia because it was too stuffy, and there was like this barrier between like there's all this great research and publications, but the only people who can read them are the people that have access to EBSCOhost and JSTOR and all those like really expensive peer-reviewed journal article databases that like lay people, myself included, like we don't have access to that stuff. And so I wanted to, in the book, help people take some of those principles from academia, from the world of nonprofits and like really good practices around grant writing and like proving that our work makes sense and is moving in the right direction. So the data literacy piece for us is so important. And I have some fun exercises that I could share if appropriate on like how we can do that. But ultimately,
yeah, that'd be lovely.
Like we just need to read all the books that are out there right now on measurement and data practices, especially in the world of artificial intelligence. Like I can't even wrap my head around what our industry is going to look like 5 years from now. But I do know that one of the critical skill sets that we need to protect and preserve our jobs is like data thinking from a data and analytics and good data practices perspective is going to make us have more opportunities and not be cut when times get tough. So that's critically important.
How do you identify the right metrics to measure learning success? I mean, that might be a little broad, but I'm just wondering, is there like a starting place for folks who have never really had the opportunity to do any measurement of maybe a learning program that they've built, or maybe for like a learning team for a corporate team? Maybe they've just purchased this off the shelf training or something like that. Where do they start with as far as metrics go?
So there was a question on my YouTube channel that was exactly this question. And funny enough, I talked with my measurement meetup group on Monday, yesterday. I love alliteration.
Nice.
So,
Perfect timing.
So all of that, like, we kind of flushed out. And at the end of the day, what are we doing and why is the question we should be answering through data. And sometimes what we're doing is disseminating information. And why we're doing it is because we want to make sure we don't get sued in the event of a safety incident. And so in terms of metrics, if all we're doing is making sure that people get the information that they need so that we can prevent future lawsuits, well, the metrics become really simple then. It's let's make sure that the target audience gets the information, and we can prove that. And from a compliance perspective, if we're trying to prevent lawsuits, then we just want to track the lawsuits that have come in, or that risk management, be able to take a pulse on how many threats are we experiencing in this area, and are we seeing that trend go down as we see the trend go up of people getting the information that they need so that we don't have those kinds of safety incidents. And of course, there's no solution in the learning world that's ever going to solve completely for a problem like lawsuits, but we can contribute. And in the world of lawsuits and litigation, oftentimes we just have to have the right documentation to prove that people had all that they needed to have by law and regulation. And that can be that simple. And then we think of the leadership development side of things, and I go back to the same question. Well, what are you doing and why? We do leadership development for all kinds of reasons. And if it's because there's too much conflict on a team, or if it's because the team hates their boss, or if it's because productivity is down, what are we doing and why? And that question and its answer should guide the metrics that we select. And that's the easiest way to get started, because at the end of the day, we just want to be able to prove to ourselves, for one, but also to our stakeholders, that the investment in time and resources was worth it in the end. And it all goes back to that question. What were you doing and why?
And are there any tools and resources that you would suggest for organizations that are just starting from scratch when it comes to measuring learning impact?
Yes. And this is very contrary to what you may hear from other people.
Love it.
So what I find really interesting, being a kind of outsider in the corporate learning and development world, is that we have these robust technology platforms called business intelligence tools. We have Power BI, we have a whole Google suite, like whatever the organization is using, the Microsoft suite. There's a lot of robust business intelligence programs and platforms and tools out there. And yet then L&D has this very separate, learning experience platforms, and they exist on this island. And in truth, we as L&D and education professionals are a toolbox, just like marketing, just like operations, just like customer success. We are parts of a larger system that make an organization whole. And why aren't we using the same business intelligence tools as everybody else? That to me doesn't really make sense. So my suggestion as like a first step would be, what do we as a department need to do to integrate with the existing business intelligence suite? That might be like having a conversation with the person that oversees the business intelligence suite that you're currently using, and just getting to know them in terms of, how might we start integrating the learning data that we have with the other business intelligence data that we have. So a lot of this, I think, is solved in conversations and curiosity. But with the world of AI, like looming ahead in good and scary ways, what we need to be doing is trying to get all of our data in one house, because AI is not going to be helpful for us in all the ways that it can be if our data is fragmented and in different formats. And so getting ready for that is, I think, the thing we should be prioritizing is how can we make all of our data in the entire organization integrated? And if you don't know how to do that, start having conversations, approaching the right people with curiosity to start moving in that direction. I think that's the most important thing that we can do.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there, because companies are just inherently collecting so much data. They may not even know that they're collecting all of the stuff that they are. And so how do you approach folks with that conversation? Because I would imagine that really getting a handle on all the data that they have collected could be time consuming, as well as potentially an expensive approach, especially if they're using multiple different systems for a bunch of different lines of businesses.
Yeah. I would start with what's the most important program or service that learning and development is offering to the organization. And that will be different with every single organization. But there's probably some kind of signature program, a flagship program, or the program that's costing the organization the most money. It's the biggest investment. Like, for example, when I worked at the National Domestic Violence Hotline, we had a 60-hour at the time, that could be different now, but we had this onboarding program that was a requirement for us to get all of our advocates up to speed to be able to, assess for suicide and get people access to resources as quickly as possible, to de-escalate situations over the phone or via chat. Like, these are really high stakes dynamics that people need to be prepared for as quickly as possible. So that was our flagship program. It was the biggest investment, and it was the most important program that we offered, and to make the organization do what it needed to do, which was serve people.
Yeah.
So what can we do? And this is my story. I became probably the closest person when I left that organization, the closest person, that relationship that was the strongest, was with the director of IT. He and I, I would go have one-off meetings, and I didn't know this person from Adam, but just like knocking on their door and asking questions, and we started collaborating on a lot of things. We ended up rolling out Salesforce as the new technology tool for the entire organization to take calls, manage data, and we had to train people on that. And prior to my relationship with him, that could have been a totally separate effort that the IT team managed probably horribly. But instead, he leaned on me and was like, hey, can you partner with us on this really big rollout? Because we know that training is going to be a big part of it, and we don't know what we're doing. And I said, I'd love to. And so those kinds of partnerships, like, they literally start with curiosity. It was, like, hey, Ed, where are you struggling? Or, hey, I'm really having a difficult time with this person in the organization, and I'm trying to figure out how can I build a better relationship with them, because they're a piece of a puzzle I'm missing in operations data to help me, right? So curiosity, I think, a healthy curiosity without an agenda, I think, can go a long way in having us build relationships with the people who will be our biggest advocates and partners as our journey continues in the organization and beyond. So I don't think there's a formula for that, but authenticity, curiosity, and like a general service-oriented approach, I think, go a really long way.
I think that's wonderful advice, especially since post-COVID, we've all been very much in a siloed, on our own type of working environment. So please, folks, don't forget to reach out to your coworkers and have those experiences. And as you say, be curious and be innovative, and have a joy for changing things up a bit.
Yeah.
So building stockholder relationships is often very tough, maybe the toughest portion of the job when it comes to learning and development. What would be your top strategies for securing stakeholder buy-in?
A couple of things. So one is immediate, and the other takes time, but is an ongoing effort. So the immediate thing that I recommend, and we've probably heard this from other people, is what I think of as a return on expectations. The challenge is sometimes our stakeholders' expectations aren't in alignment with good learning science or even good data practices. And yet,
no fault of theirs.
Yeah. And yet those expectations, maybe we don't understand why they have them because we don't have the perspective that they do. And that's okay. There's a gap and we want to work to close that. But again, the authenticity and curiosity in approaching stakeholders is really helpful. But returning the expectations of our stakeholders, and that's not just the C-suite, it's anyone that is asking for our services. What are they expecting? And sometimes that, in a good learning science approach, we get to the root cause of the problem and make sure that a learning solution is really going to solve for that. And we push back if it's not a learning solution that is the right solution. But sometimes we are operating in less than ideal dynamics, and everyone's had a story where somebody asks for training and they want it done this way and they will not budge. So what are their expectations, and what's the thing that's most important to them, and how can we try and figure out a way to return those expectations while still delivering on good learning science to the best of our ability? And then those expectations can become a conversation point, and we can give the data back to our CEO or our operations manager, whoever, help them to see that we are capable of delivering on expectations and other things. And I think that's our low-hanging fruit, is just to have conversations about, what are you really needing through this intervention? And what do you expect will happen when it's over? And do we understand why those expectations are present? And, again, curiosity, authenticity, and then giving the data back as the program is rolling out to demonstrate that we are returning on those expectations and we are supporting the core need that they had. So that's the low-hanging fruit approach, and will, over time compound and we'll build trust and rapport in ways that are really important for us. The other thing that I don't think we do often enough, though others are talking about it, is to build business acumen. That it is essential for us to understand, well, how does our business make money, and who are the competitors, and what do our shareholders and our boards, what do they care about? And how can we keep a pulse on that? And it's not a one and done. It's not like you can get that information one time and then never have to evaluate it again. I think it's something we should build a habit of, on a quarterly basis, go do an exploration and make sure that we've got a finger on the pulse of what's really important to the organization right now, and make sure then that we're trying to do what we can to align our learning activities with those important priorities, such that we can try to prove that we're not just a cost center, that we are actually something that is a worthy investment in contributing to what the organization cares about the most. And we've got to do that work. No one's going to do it for us.
Yep. Who do you see as the primary audience for measurement and evaluation on a shoestring?
I think there are three audiences. One is a sort of a stretch, but a relevant one, and that would be nonprofit executives. So nonprofits also struggle to tell their impact story. And really similarly, learning and development in the nonprofit world, they're great at capturing vanity data, butts in seats, and service quotas, things like that, because that's the easiest thing to capture. But the number of people that we're serving, or the number of people that complete training and how much training they complete or how much service they get, those aren't data points that are going to help us to say, well, this is so what? So what that somebody was served, or so what that somebody completed training. The impact part of the conversation is the so what's on the other side of that investment of time or money. And so the audiences that I think will really benefit are the nonprofit executives and learning executives. And then the third audience are the individual contributors who know that we need to be measuring more and measuring better. And we get intuitively that if we aren't doing this, at some point, we will look bad, our job will be called into question, and we know this in our hearts, and yet maybe we don't make the time to build our measurement practice. So the individual contributor who recognizes the value of data and measurement, but maybe isn't doing much of that at the moment, the book will give you small, simple strategies to just start doing measurement more frequently and build the practice of it such that over time it becomes more intuitive and you can add more complexity to your measurement work. But not to start with the most complex thing, start with the easiest thing and learn from it. And that's really what the book is encouraging.
And how is the role of measurement evolving currently in the field of talent development? So especially since post-pandemic, now that we're here in this kind of hybrid work environment.
A couple things I've observed. One is we lean too heavily on our learning technology to give us the data that's impact data. And I've also seen a lot of vendors on social media say that the data that they provide offers a return on investment for the programs that are delivered, and that's simply not true. So the vanity data is a part of our impact equation, but it's not the whole story. And I think the reason that the stakeholders maybe don't have the trust in L&D that they need is because the data that we're giving them isn't the data that they want to see in terms of, is this a good investment or was this worth the time?
Yeah.
I'm not the only one that says this, but our technology tools aren't the magic bullet that's going to give us the data that we need. We've got to do the work to connect that data to the other business intelligence that we have in our organizations, kind of going back full circle to the beginning of our conversation. That technology in of itself is not sufficient to tell an impact story. So we need to accept that and try to make the connection, those bridges between the learning data that we have, the performance data that's in operations, and then the business intelligence data that talks about what's happening for the organization with its most important metrics. So we have to work to make those connections. And now I'm totally forgetting the question you asked me, and I had a second point, and I...
Oh, no, it's okay. The role of how measurement is evolving.
Oh, that's right.
Post-pandemic.
Right. So how is measurement evolving post-pandemic? In summary, one, over-reliance on technology. And so we need to kind of take a step back and ask ourselves, okay, well, what data is our tech giving us and what do we need to bridge those gaps? And then the other thing that's happening, and this maybe is a skewed perspective, but I'm seeing that consultants like myself who are experts in measurement, I'm not the only one. I have friends and we talk about this all the time. My measurement nerdy friends and I are like, so many people want us to come in and deliver workshops and to share information, but there's no budget yet for people to hire us to implement the systems and to actually create that lasting change. So I think that in the world of measurement, we're still currently in the space that it's nice to have, but it's not necessary. And that will change with artificial intelligence being ripe for us to start using to become more efficient and to have more intelligent insights with our data. There will be a shift that happens where we need better systems and we need consultants like myself to come in and help build those systems and build those bridges. But the money or the perspective isn't there yet. So as I'm seeing an evolution, I think that will change in the future, but measurement is still commonly seen as a nice to have and not a need to have. And I think that holds our industry back, unfortunately.
Yeah, I agree entirely. I mean, in my mind, if you're going through the trouble of building what you believe as successful training programs, why would you not measure the actual results of it? You really need to get that information. And so it doesn't really, in my mind, it doesn't really seem like it's a nice to have.
I agree.
It seems like a necessity. Last thing before I let you go for the day, what's maybe the key takeaway that you hope that readers get from the book?
I hope that they have the feeling that measurement is something they can do. I think too often it's overwhelming and it feels like that should be somebody else should do it, but not me. And the truth is, if not you, then who? And every one of us needs to have a measurement practice and perspective, whether it's in this role that you're serving today or one in the future. And so feeling like we can measure, we can do it. And we can do it and get good results, as in good quality data, trustworthy data, data that helps us to make better decisions, that you can do that regardless of the expertise or experience that you have. That's the feeling and the experience I want people to walk away from the book.
Awesome. Well, Alaina, thank you so much for joining us today. There will be a link in our show description as well as our show notes to pre-order the book. I believe it comes out November 26th.
You remembered
Is that right?
correctly.
Yes.
It is a holiday gift to everyone.
Yes. You know those holidays are coming up. It's soup season, and it's time to sit down with a nice bowl of soup and read a good book.
That's right.
So thank you again. And I hope to see you here at DevLearn here in a couple of weeks.
That's right. I can't believe November is just a couple of weeks away, and I will be at DevLearn, and I look forward to meeting you in person at that event.
Awesome. Well, I can't wait. We'll share a coffee.
Sounds good. Thank you, Doug.
Thank you. Thanks so much for listening. As always, like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget to sign up for our newsletter, The Buzz, to keep up with all things L&D. This year, we're going to be at DevLearn from the 6th through the 8th of November. So if you're there in Vegas, please reach out. I'd love to get a cup of coffee with you and hear all the exciting things you've learned at the conference. See you next time.